Good afternoon to you, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. Here's your hurricane outlook and discussion for the first day of the climatological ramping up of the hurricane season, August 20th, 2018. I'm going to go over a lot today, so get a good book as you sit back and relax and enjoy what I have to say. It's a joke. I'm just joking. But there is a lot to cover, though hopefully you won't read a book while I'm doing so. Maybe you're listening to this on a device, on a train or a bus or a plane somewhere. Who knows? Anyhow, there is definitely a lot to look at. We're going to go over the latest sort of where we are, the state of the union, so to speak, for the Atlantic Basin especially. Where are we sitting today, and where does it look like we're going, so to speak? And then we will take a look at what's happening in the different basins, the Atlantic Basin. Here's a cliffhanger for you. It's a big fat zero. Nothing's happening out there right now, and I think that's going to change in September. Doesn't mean that it has to. I just think that it will. The Atlantic doesn't care what I think. The activity in the Pacific, though, definitely has my attention. I'm going to talk a lot about Hurricane Lane and its potential impacts to Hawaii and what that might mean for me over the next couple of days. And we'll take a look at the Typhoon out in the western Pacific. I think you pronounce it Solik or something like that. So we have a lot to cover. Let's get rid of my mug and let's move on to it, shall we? So here we are, the August 20th date. This is the traditional beginning of the peak of the hurricane season. There's a secondary peak here in October and a third peak here in parts of the first part of November. Will this year follow suit? We will see. I don't think we're going to see much of anything at all the last 10 days of August, believe it or not. 10, 11 days, something like that. It has 31 days. Nothing in the main development region to speak of. Maybe another one of these storms that forms in the subtropics, but this is traditionally right here. This is it. This is when we start this ramp up. If you've ever been on a roller coaster and you get on that little track that they pull you up on, this is where that typically begins. Actually, it's funny because, this is kind of level, and then boom, it goes up a few days after the 20th. But nevertheless, this is what I consider the peak time from here until about mid-October is when the most activity occurs, and we will see. All right, so let's take a look at the stage. All right, what does the field, the stage, whatever, what does it look like? Well, we are not in an El Nino per se. The traditional warming of the equatorial Pacific off the coast of South America, which would be over here on the eastern side of this subsurface chart, all the way across equatorial, and moving westward. It's not there. There are bits and pieces of the equatorial Pacific that are warmer than average right here. Then you have a large area that's not, and then you have a large area that is fairly large, and then a pretty large area that's not, and it's actually a little colder. So we're not in the traditional El Nino where, yep, you look out at the Pacific and there's an El Nino out there. It's trying, the atmosphere is behaving. Generally, it's kind of like dragging along the Pacific, and it's fighting it, okay? And the two are in sort of a quarrel. They're not in agreement, like couples when, hey, where do you want to go for dinner? And I don't know, where do you want to go? Well, I want to get some steak somewhere. I don't want any steak. That's how this is going. The atmosphere is trying to drag the Pacific into this El Nino state, to the steakhouse, if you will, and the Pacific is being stubborn. There is a lot of very warm water relative to average at depth here, more than 150 meters deep, and that'll take some time to make its way to the surface. But for all intents and purposes, for the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season, we are not in your traditional debilitating El Nino state in terms of how it impacts the Atlantic. But it's complicated. If El Nino had a Facebook page, the relationship would say it's complicated for the status. So let's look at the actual temperatures, all right? So here are your daily temperatures. This is updated roughly every day from the Reynolds, Dr. Richard Reynolds method of calculating sea surface temperatures. And let me change this to blue so it'll be more helpful. And let's take a look at the 26 degrees Celsius line, which is about right here. And that's Celsius, so it's about, we'll just round it up and call it 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about 79.5 or something like that. And this is about the best I can do. So a great deal of the tropics, with the exception of the extreme eastern Atlantic here, this is 20 degrees of latitude right there. So just one little area here is not warm enough for development. Everything else is. So water temperatures are certainly where they need to be. And in terms of departures from normal, the water temperatures in the Atlantic Basin, generally a quarter to a half a degree Celsius. This is the half degree isotherm here, I think. And so they're about a half a degree on average below the long-term average, okay, the mean. That's in the tropical Atlantic out here, where tropical waves come off and try to develop. Everything else, as you can clearly see, west of there, and then certainly north, is well above the long-term average. Way up here in the North Atlantic, quite a bit warmer than it should be. Amazingly so. The Gulf of Mexico also a quarter to a half a degree above the long-term average. The Caribbean Sea running generally just slightly above average. And we'll see. So that's what that looks like. Now the actual high-octane fuel, the upper ocean heat content, and this is important because it's the skin. Like right here, the skin of my hand is a certain temperature, and then inside, is another temperature. The surface is typically cooled by sweat, evaporation, and other forces, just going like this, and a fan or whatever. But inside of my hand and anywhere else, same with you, below the skin temperature it's warmer, generally speaking. That's why you don't take your temperature by putting a thermometer right up onto your skin. The skin temperature is one thing, but the internal temperature of you and me is what we measure when we get that roughly 98.6 average for what we're supposed to be. Same holds true for the tropics. The skin of the ocean can be around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, but if it's only right at the surface there, a few meters deep, then it's real easy to wind, right, to blow across and mix that up. And a hurricane is very efficient at that. Strong trade winds blowing across, very efficient at doing that. So the deeper that 80-degree line is in the ocean equates to higher upper ocean heat content, and that's what we are seeing on this particular chart right here. We'll go back using red. So anything that starts to show up is typically regarded as fairly high fuel, and then you get different gradations of it, and higher and higher in the Caribbean, where it's typically the highest in the Western Hemisphere. But this too is generally quite favorable for development, especially west of about 45 degrees west longitude right here. Tried to draw it as best I can. I mean, if we had something riding along pretty close to 10 north in a west-northwesterly direction like that, there's some decent ocean heat content to tap into. But again, the water's right up here, and then maybe in a little bit more to the west, a little cooler than we're used to seeing. But not the case off the southeast, parts of the mid-Atlantic and northeast, certainly around the islands, the Gulf of Mexico. No lack of energy, for sure. So here's the skin temperatures that I was talking about. So these are the actual temperatures. 30 Celsius, which is about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. 31 Celsius right there. Ugh, you're talking muggy. Wow. 31 degrees Celsius off the west coast of Florida, down here south of Cuba. So no surprises, nothing ridiculously either side of normal that has anybody concerned. The Gulf is warm enough, we know that. Off the Atlantic coast. Now this is interesting. I took the kids to the beach yesterday, and the interesting part of that, see this little green right here? That's 26 Celsius. That's about 79.5 degrees, right? And I could notice. I was like, ugh, that's a little chillier than I'm used to. These 28 Celsius temps have been kind of pushed offshore. I was like, oh man, and I check this every time before I go down there. And why is this happening? Well, we're getting more westerly winds across here, southwesterly, generally, and that's literally pushing the water away from the coastline. And you notice up here, The 26 Celsius line's been pushed away from New Jersey a little bit and come south just a little bit farther south from Long Island. So what I'm going to look for is, do we get some high pressure building out over the northwest Atlantic where we get more easterly flow coming in, pushing these warmer sea surface temperatures back toward the coast. And for beach interests, forget the hurricanes. If you like going to the beach, that's what you want to see. Unfortunately, that kind of pattern also invites trouble if there's something south to be steered to the north. So if you want to prolong the summer, get some high pressure to build in some easterlies, and you can push that warmer water back towards the coast. But you got to watch out. You never know. Right now, though, nothing to watch out for at all. Nothing over the next 5 days. The Atlantic basin still dominated by this sinking air over the Atlantic, trying to draw 3D concept in 2 dimensions. If memory serves, there's still a pretty big tropical upper tropospheric trough carved out over here, and that's converging air where it's coming together in the upper levels, and that's not good. You need the opposite. You need the air to come up and rise and spread out and be divergent everywhere, and, well, not everywhere, but enough, and it's not doing so, and it probably won't do so, believe it or not, for another 2 to 3 weeks. So, yeah, if you've got plans to visit any of these islands, with the exception of tropical waves coming through, you're good to go. Puerto Rico, even Hispaniola through Cuba, you're going to go down to the Caymans down here, Jamaica, the Bahamas. Any cruises from now until the end of August, I don't see any reason to think there's going to be any interruptions. So enjoy it, and don't worry about it. Now, in the Pacific, the Central Pacific, we need to talk about Lane. It looked to me, and quite a lot of other people like the other day, that Lane was going to come by well to the south like this. Now, the bets are being hedged, so to speak, and I'm getting a little worried about this for our friends over here in Hawaii. The GFS has kind of led the way, and I'll show you that in a moment. This is the 3-day forecast. Let's look at the 5-day outlook overall. It's not going to just knee-jerk reaction. We know that from the Atlantic side. This is all issued from the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. And the GFS is showing it coming up like this, roughly. I'm going to show you in just a moment. And, the ensemble prediction system from the Euro, the Canadian models, etc., painting a very complex picture for this area. But if we look at the headline, Hurricane Lane may be a threat to portions of the Hawaiian Islands this week. So I'm going to be watching this extremely close. This is what the GFS is indicating over the next 4 days or so. That is the big island right there. Let's zoom in on this, and I can show you this nice animation from Tropical Tidbits. There's the big island of Hawaii right there. Lane comes in, pretty strong, right? Comes up from the south. That's where it really gets interesting. When they approach from the east, like Iselle did in 2014, I think it was, and they run right into the big island head on, it's lights out. It's done. Those systems get destroyed very quickly because it's a big old jagged volcanic island sticking up out there. In this case, though, as Lane comes in from the south, it's got the warmer water to continue to work with. The islands themselves, especially the big island, act to sort of deflect the atmosphere just a little bit and create a different environment. I was reading about that earlier from people smarter than I, and this could be a big problem. Think about Hawaii. It's beautiful there, but it doesn't rain cats and dogs often. And a hurricane's going to bring torrential rain. All right, so even just the threat of many inches of rainfall, tropical rainfall, torrential rain, could be a big problem. And as such, I am considering very strongly hopping on a plane here in Wilmington, either tomorrow morning at the earliest, but no later than Wednesday morning for obvious reasons, and going to Hawaii. I have been in contact with my people, so to speak, at the Weather Channel that I work with. Hopefully they will see fit to send me there as part of our annual arrangement that we have. I could take some of my remote cameras and provide some live updates from the area, maybe even some live streams from the remote cameras. But it's very complicated. There's islands there, obviously. It's the Hawaiian Islands. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. It may be that the GFS is wrong, so to speak, in this depiction that we're seeing here from one run the operational model from 12Z today. We'll be looking at a lot of different factors, but stay tuned. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's get rid of me. You folks in Hawaii, definitely keep an eye on this. You don't need me to tell you that, but it is becoming a little bit more of a threat. Also, in the Westpac, we do have this typhoon. It's either Solik or Solik, or maybe it's none of the above. Nevertheless, the forecast track here, as indicated from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, has it passing between these larger islands here, which I do not necessarily know how to pronounce, but kind of like a football between the goalposts. And we can see that better on this still image. I'm going to zoom in. Basically, a semi looks like it lost its truck tire out here in the Westpac. That is a huge eye, roughly 70 miles in diameter. Pretty good convection around that. The radius of maximum winds has expanded as a result. Clearly, very well developed outflow, as you can see here. A typhoon is the exact same weather entity as a hurricane. All right? They are not two different things. They are the same weather phenomenon, but they're called different things, just like, I should have researched this, but a cat is called a cat in the United States, and it's probably called a cat everywhere else in the world with my luck. But you know what I'm saying? We call it a cat in China and Japan or wherever. They may call it something else. And you people out there in social media are so darn smart, you'll know the answer to that. And most of you already know what I'm telling you, but I'm just re-emphasizing here that, right, typhoons and hurricanes, same weather feature. All right, so Josh Morgerman is right there. He is the icyclone fella, and he is hoping that this goes like that, right over him, for obvious reasons. Will it do that? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. The animation here, as this gentleman posted earlier, I saw this on Twitter. This really shows it much better. This is where Josh is on this island, and I saw James Reynolds tweet that he was not flying. I think James lives in and around Tokyo, which I think's up here. Boy, I hope that's right. I could be wrong. That he wasn't going to come down to chase this. He felt like it wasn't worth it, etc. And I mean, if it goes right between these goalposts right here, so to speak, on its way up to South Korea, yeah, I mean, Josh will have some action, but he'll be on the south side of it. We'll see what happens. The good thing is he'll be tweeting about it, and those of you that follow, you'll be able to keep up and see what's happening. All right, so in terms of what I'm going to be doing, get me back on. For Lane, I don't know yet. We'll see what happens. I texted a couple of other people that I confer with. I like to get a consensus when it's kind of debatable as to what may happen with something. I've never been to Hawaii, so this would literally be one of the few times that I actually chase a hurricane, so to speak. I know people like to use that term. Oh, Mark's a hurricane chaser. Well, 99% of them I don't chase. I go before they get there, and then they run over me. It's called an intercept, but that's not as, I guess, rolling off the tongue as hurricane chaser. But this one, since it's ahead of me, I would fly out to Hawaii, and I'd be chasing it. I would still get there before it does, hopefully, right? That's the plan. So we'll see. We will know, I think tomorrow, because the window's really going to start to close. It's about an 18-hour total affair to get out there from Wilmington. Wilmington to Charlotte to LAX, and then on to Hawaii. And, that's a good chunk of the day. So stay tuned. We shall see. I'll be talking about it on Twitter and elsewhere. And my patrons on Patreon definitely will be talking to you guys, since you'll be having the first access to stuff. Who would have thought that the first significant landfall event of the season might be in Hawaii? I was out there for Alberto, but that was a subtropical storm in May, no less. All right, so that is it. We covered a lot, as I promised we would. Good to see everybody again. I thought I would at least make an appearance here today, for what it's worth. Hi. So that's it. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. I am on Twitter at HurricaneTrack, and yes, I'm on Patreon. If you're interested in supporting my work there, now's a good time to do so. I will be back with more for you tomorrow, one way or the other, and we'll see what happens in terms of what the final decision is with Lane And if I'm not going, then we'll just stay here in Wilmington, North Carolina, talking about a bunch of nothing in the Atlantic until things change. Have a good rest of your Monday. Thanks for watching. We'll talk again tomorrow.